Taoism. Where do we see Taoist practices or ideas in our fandoms? And can Christians learn from these Taoist ideas in our fandoms? Hey guys, I couldn't be more excited for this. I'm Joshua Noel. I'm one of your hosts here with the one and only, the most handsome, according to Nick, the most handsome host, Christian Ashley.
I'm glad you listened to that recording. Had a fun time with him there.
I miss Nick already.
Yes.
Anyway, this is part of our companion series, everybody. So this goes along with our annual theme of religions. It's not part of the main feed. It's kind of to complement the main feed. All year this year, we're going through different religions and our favorite IPs. So we're going to look at the religions in Marvel, the religions in Game of Thrones is coming up soon, right? But for our companion series, we're looking at real world religions as they're portrayed in these things. So we're going to kind of just give you a shotgun, here's where we see Taoism and a bunch of different things. And I know we could cover a lot of things. There's probably going to be people disappointed that we didn't choose the one they wanted us to choose that has Taoist principles in it. In which case, cool. Drop in the comments where you see Taoism in our fandoms. We'd love to learn more. But part of this is like a learning exercise for us. And then part of this is just kind of exploring how religion in general is portrayed in fandoms, even if it's not Christian religion, and then kind of thinking about how do we deal with these things from a Christian perspective, right? So today we're going to be looking at Outlaw Star, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Kung Fu Panda, Shang Chi, Star Wars, Kingdom Hearts. Sorry, Will. And of course, my favorite Taoist, Winnie the Pooh. That is not a dig at Taoist, for the record. I love Winnie the Pooh. I know he's not really a Taoist, but we have some excellent Taoist principles in the book of Winnie the Pooh that we're going to talk about later on. I'm going to show my true Diz nerd colors. It's going to be a great time. If you're watching on YouTube, which you are, smash that like button, smash subscribe. If you next time you listen on the main feed, make sure you rate and review the show wherever you're at, Podchaser, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those good things. And just a reminder, this is one of 4 series. We have our companion series, Comic Book Catch Up, Manga Mustard, and Drinks with Tejas that exclusively go live first to our Patreons, or all of our supporters, all of our patrons, whether they're Captivate, Apple Podcasts, whatever. Actually, no, these are only on Patreon. Sorry. This goes to Patreon first, then it goes on to YouTube later on. So big thanks to everyone who supports the show and makes these series possible. Now we can move on, Christian, to the topic of the day. We're going to be talking about all kinds of Taoist principles, Taoist ideas, Taoist teachings, even in Kung Fu Panda. But let's start with our relationship to Taoism in general, how familiar we are with this religion, and where we've encountered this in the real world. So, Christian, first with you, how familiar are you with Taoism?
One of my earliest memories of this is pronouncing it Taoism and being corrected by someone in college. Because, me, stupid, ignorant person, sees a T in front of something and goes, oh, well, it must be a T. Well, with how things are transliterated in English sometimes, that's not the case. It is Taoism, as I was kindly reprimanded. And as far as researching it itself, it's always been one of those fringe philosophies / religions that I haven't put too much time and effort into, Confucianism. I've looked stuff up. I've read about it. I've enjoyed doing that, but I would not claim I'm an expert in anything. So if I get anything wrong, throw a little grace my way. I'm going to do my best to represent what I have learned, though. So that's probably my earliest memories of it.
Yeah. I'm trying to do, I don't know earliest memories. I did a lot of martial arts in high school and stuff, and they teach you some stuff about yin yang and all that, but none of the really religion stuff. But I was a dual major for a long time in college. Mind you, that's still 10 years ago. And one of my dual majors was actually in world religions. So I did study Taoism in college. Again, I wouldn't say I'm an expert. I learned a lot, though. I like to think that I'm less ignorant than I was about the subject. And I find, so C.S. Lewis writes about how to him, Hinduism is his backup religion. He kind of makes a joke about. where he's like, I think if anything else was going to make sense, it'd be this. For me, it's Taoism. And I'm even probably going to go after C.S. Lewis in this and how he defends Christianity, improves Christianity and mere Christianity. He's going through the religions going, okay, well, there has to be some kind of ultimate good. And in dualist religions, there's good and bad. Well, it's only bad compared to good. That's not a thing in dualist religions. There isn't good and bad. They don't exist. So that defense that C.S. Lewis gave, kind of a little bit out of ignorance of what dualism actually is. Which we'll get more to that. We'll talk about like Star Wars and stuff like that, or Riku and Kingdom Hearts. I can't wait to talk about Riku. It could just be a episode about Riku. Hey, we're gonna hijack the episode, guys. Let's start with. Oh man, no, I am excited. And if you do want more of any of these, let us know, because we're only gonna be able to do like brief surveys on some of these topics, and I will do an entire series of episodes on Riku if you guys let me. Do not question my so I'm supposed to be telling you my familiarity with Taoism, but I'm just going on Kingdom Hearts, right? Sorry guys, but no, I claim Taoism as like my background. And also though, I think this was the religion that really made me challenge me on what religion is, and it challenged me on the whole idea of you can only be Christian, you can't have multiple religions. I still don't really know where I stand on that, but it's really hard for me to look at Taoism and go, someone couldn't believe this in Christianity. Like, it's harder for me to look at it and think that way because, well, they don't have like the idea that we have of every single thing has to be literally true. They can just go through the Tao Te Ching, which is their sacred text, and go, yeah, I don't like this. I'm not going to use this part. So, like, when you come to that, it's like, well, I guess you could be Christian in that, because there are definitely parts of this that line up with Christianity that we're going to talk about. And it's not like it has another God. It doesn't have, it's weird. It is very much one of those that verges a lot closer to philosophy than religion a lot of the times. I say that, and Confucianism is probably true of both of them. Buddhism, somewhat, a little less. Buddhism is a little more of a religion, it feels like, than a philosophy compared to these two. But compared to our Western religions, they're all way closer to philosophy than religion. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. And that's where we're going to be talking a lot about principles. And where a lot of times you're like, Kung Fu Panda, where did it have Taoism? It didn't tell me that I had to subscribe to the way and become one with everything or anything about us, the gods. And I'm like, yeah, well, neither does Taoism usually. Like, usually it is a lot more, hey, think more simple, stupid. That's the whole bit.
Yeah, it's not really an evangelistic religion / philosophy, because by its kind of nature, it doesn't really have to be.
Yeah, like it's again, this isn't the point of this isn't to evangelize, but I will say, if you were trying to evangelize to someone who truly believes in Taoism, I imagine it would be a lot like trying to cut water. Like, because like the whole thing is, okay, but Jesus did this. Oh, that's great. That is what Jesus should have done because he was being him. You know, they're like, oh, well, you did all these terrible things and we all have been terrible. Yeah, as we should be, because that's who we are. It's like, man, it's infuriating.
Yes.
But also I do love it because I love this idea of and there's an image that actually we'll talk about a little bit later too, probably. It's going to come up a lot, so I'm just going to bring it up. There's an image that's portrayed a lot in Chinese cultures of three men standing around a vial of vinegar, each tasting it, and one Siddhartha, the Buddha, and he's tasting it and he's making it, life is suffering. He's like, ugh. Then you have Confucius, who's kind of looks upset but curious, and the idea is he wants to structure it. He wants to use it to make something better. And then you have Lao Tzu, the one who created Taoism or started Taoism, however you want to word that, just smiling because, man, this vinegar tastes exactly like it's supposed to. Vinegar.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that image. I think it's a very healthy way to get through a lot of things in life, but I don't think it's a good final answer, which is why I'm still Christian and not Taoist. But we'll get to that. So, look, now getting kind of that out of the way, we're going to talk a lot about like dualism. We're going to talk a lot about allowing things to simply be as they are. Those kind of ideas are some of the big foundations of Taoism. And first, we're going to a show I've never heard of. So Christian's going to take it away as we start with our discussion on Outlaw Star.
Yeah, I'm not probably gonna have too much to say on this because this is that typical. For those not to know, this is humanity has gone to the stars. We populated other planets, and they're searching for this, uh, treasure that can be found along the way. It's kind of a little treasure island in space to an extent, with a little more thrown in
Treasure Planet.
there. Yeah, some Treasure Planet 2 just came out like 3 or so years before that. Yeah,
Oh,
and it in the series, this is that typical anime thing of religion is magic. And that's why you'll see sometimes, Christianity, like we're able to use magic holy spells at times because we're Christians. Or if you have a Shinto character, able to use these specific mantras and stuff like that to, seal away demons or cast out evil spirits or something like that.
mhm.
For Outlaw Star, it was actually one of the first times I do remember encountering Taoism. Like, is there are these enemy organizations working against our main crew who are searching for this great treasure that are able to use Taoist magic of a sorts to empower themselves and fly and all that magic, all that BS that doesn't actually exist with any
Mm.
actual religion. So, but it
Sure
also
does.
kind of brings us to the philosophies. Like, I mean, if you want to like really condense Taoism to its barest components and be like super simple about it, is just go with the flow. I
Mm,
mean,
mhm,
that's honest. Obviously, there's more to it than that, but that's a
mhm.
simple mantra you can get to. Just go with the flow, and that's kind of one of the things Gene Starwin, our main character, has to learn along the way is how does he do that? To use the magic system of this world to use his special bullets that he has for his gun. So not too much in here as far as like what we could talk about, but it is something I did want to bring up. It's like, hey, this is in here, and it's something I'm familiar with.
Yeah, and a lot of that go with the flow mindset is in Christianity. We're gonna get to parts where Christianity and Taoism don't, you know, intermingle perfectly. But you do see this thing in the Bible of you know, don't worry about tomorrow. There's enough to worry about today, right? Like you have these things of all things work to good for those who believe in him. So believe and just trust it's going to be okay and just kind of go with it. Um, there are a lot of these mindsets in the Bible of God has a plan and we just kind of need to learn to chill, to go with the flow of God's plan, which I think that's the difference is we have that qualifier added to it. God's plan. Not just go with the flow, but go with the flow of something. But it is still very much similar. I think that's fair. Would you say that?
Yeah.
All right. Let's go ahead and move on to one that I didn't expect you to say. And then when you did, I was like, this makes perfect sense. Kung
Uh,
Fu Panda.
I didn't either until I was doing some more research on this. It's like, how has this come up in other fandoms and stuff? And it's like, it's been so long since I've watched the movie, so I had to pull up the scene in question that really made me think about this. It's between Master Oogway and Master Shifu,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, and they're both kind of
Oogway's
discussing like
definitely just a Taoist.
yeah, uh, what to do with Tai Lung, and how is Poe going to be able to deal with them? So Oogway is like Joshua said, he's our more Taoist in this situation, and Shifu is kind of more Confucianist. And Oogway says, my friend, the panda will never fulfill his destiny, nor you yours, until you let go of the illusion of control. And Shifu says, illusion? Oogway says, yes, look at this tree, Shifu. I cannot make it blossom when it suits me, nor make it bear fruit before its time. Shifu, but there are things we can control. I can control when the fruit will fall. I can control where to plant the seed. That is no illusion, master. Oogway, ah, yes, but no matter what you do, that seed will grow to be a peach tree. You may wish for an apple or an orange, but you will get a peach. Shifu, but a peach cannot defeat Tai Lung. Oogway, maybe it can, if you're willing to guide it, to nurture it, to believe in it. So that scene in question is like the huge philosophies between those two characters, like the student versus the master, has always been a huge trope in fiction. But we get like Uguay's more, Taoist philosophy. It's like, hey, like this is going to happen because it was always meant to happen. You're expecting it to be this because you like to control things, Shifu. But
Mhm.
what about this thing you haven't considered that is always meant to do this, but because it doesn't fit with how you align with reality, you don't expect it to?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and see, that was the scene I immediately thought of, and then as I was reading more into it too, it is the entirety of the Kung Fu Panda movies.
Mhm.
Like, and it's funny because Disney gave me a misconception that followed me into this because Disney, especially your revival era Disney, your more recent Disney, for those who aren't familiar with the eras, and if you're not familiar with the eras, check out our Disney eras series. I go really deep into all of that. But when we're thinking of Disney, Disney does this. The power's in you the whole time. Believe in yourself, and you're going to do it. And that's what I thought these were. But then upon closer inspection and thinking of it with this Taoist thing in mind of trying to do this episode, I was like, oh, wait a minute. No, this is Confucianism versus Taoism, which is funny because in Eastern cultures, usually you're both and also Buddhist and also something else. you know, they don't do
Yes.
religion the same over there. Um, but it's very much order. Hey, your dad's a cook. You're going to grow up to be a chef. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. But Poe knows he's something else. He can tell he's meant for other things. And he has to kind of learn to be true to himself, not only in his passion for Kung Fu, but also not trying to do his Kung Fu like the fastest or the skinniest, but learning to do Kung Fu as a big fat panda. And it's going to be different moves. It's going to look different. Which is where you get a lot of these religions tie into martial arts in that culture because it's a lot about learning your own body. When you're talking about Taoism, you're learning your body, learning to be you in the fight. When you do Confucianism, it's all structured, it's planned, it is more rigid movements. Buddhism is more getting in touch with yourself. You have all of these different things are tied up with our physical body. Um, it's where I've been on a kick recently, and I will recommend. He's a teacher at your school. Why can't I think of his name right now? Greg Allison, right? Dr. Greg
Yes.
Allison. Yeah, he has a book about the embodied Christ, and why it's important that we believe in an embodied spirituality. Anyway, so that's kind of what we're getting at here in this movie. Isn't learn to believe in yourself. It is you have a Te. So the Tao Te Ching is like the way of the virtue of the book, something like that. Te is like your own potential. What you can be is in you. So it's more of a spiritual principle. And it's this idea that even though he wasn't where he needed to be, who he needed to be is wrapped up in the spiritual essence of Poe. And he just had to discover it. And part of that scene you're talking about, he says, yeah, you need to learn to nurture it, help it grow into what it needs to be. And that's the whole story of Poe, is learning to nurture not who we want him to be, not our idea of martial arts, but who he could be. So nurture him to be the best him, which I think goes, again, another Christian principle of it's not that you get saved and all of a sudden you're a whole different, no longer Christian at all, or Josh at all. It's confused. Your name makes this confusing, Christian.
Yes.
But rather, the idea is when you get saved, I think C.S. Lewis is the one who writes this, but Jesus helps you be the most you. Because without that, you have sin, you have all these things of the world that hold us back from being who we could be, or if we just go by the law and we're only going according to the Torah and only strictly that, then you're a slave to the law. And Paul writes, you can either be a slave to law, a slave to sin, or you can be set free. And that is kind of my mindset here when I look at these things is, yeah, it's not the same as Christianity, but I still see this principle, something that I can learn from this. Um, any other thoughts about Kung Fu Panda, spirituality, the Te of Poe?
No, I think we've covered enough.
And you'll have more to say when it's the Te of Piglet. Um, I can't help myself, So one, I kind of thought of last minute because I don't particularly like this movie, but it does fit into the conversation pretty well. Shang Chi. Christian, you break down what is Shang Chi in the Marvel Cinematic Universe because it's not what it should be. And then,
Yeah. Okay.
sorry, and then we'll talk some about how it fits into the Dallas stuff.
No, I was surprised when you mention this because I always saw it as more like Buddhist slash Confucianist than Taoist. So I'm interested to see what you say. But as far as Shang Chi is concerned, he is the son of what should have always been the Mandarin in the MCU, but they were afraid of racism and all that, so that happened. And his
Yes,
organization, the Ten
indeed.
Rings, has been trying to mess with world affairs. Think the League of Shadows from Batman, Ra's al Ghul in that sense. And through the process, he went through a mission, went through something he never wanted to do, left that life away, and left his sister behind, left his father behind to live in America as just some nobody until, unfortunately, events happened again to force him to come back, confront his dad, and a bunch of madness involving the Dweller in Darkness potentially coming into the world and destroying it. So
Mhm.
there's more there, but just a brief.
Yeah, yeah. So I think Shang-Chi does really well. I think it does have Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism all kind of mixed in there. So I don't think it's like primarily anything, which is pretty true to Eastern culture, from my understanding. I'm not part of that culture, so I don't really know. But from my understanding, that's a lot closer to Eastern culture than a lot of what American films like to do. What's interesting is at the beginning of this movie, I'm going to try and use some correct terminology the best I can. You see him kind of focusing on the yin. He is really close to his mother. He really wants to just be an ordinary good citizen who's kind of, your cookie cutter Boy Scout, trying his best to ignore the yang of his past. Um, so for those who don't know, yin yang isn't good evil. Yin is your more
Mm.
feminine qualities, your more, sun is yin. The women are yin, water is yin. Yang is fire, yang is night, yang is masculine. They're not good and bad. They're different and they kind of bounce off each other and create balance is kind of the Taoist idea. So here you see him only focusing on the yin of his life, his mother, his, cookie cutter, Boy Scout, all that stuff. But you see throughout the movie, he's challenged to not suddenly become evil, but to accept his past from his dad, that he has certain qualities from that's going to allow him later on in the film to be victorious, to accept that he did learn these fightings. He knows how to kill. He knows all of those things that maybe we'll think of as darker. And I'm going to say dark and evil are two different things. So we'll get more to that in Kingdom Hearts. But you see him kind of learning to accept those things. And the journey of self discovery that he is on this film isn't one of, has to completely rediscover himself. I think he's really in touch with his yin. He learns to get in touch with his yang. And when he finds that balance, is when he's able to be victorious in the end. Which, hey, even though it's a cruddy movie, that's kind of cool.
Well, I won't say it was the finest film they've ever released. It's way better than what Joshua is saying.
It's
'Cause
one of my least favorite of their films. It's
wow,
pretty down there for me. I just not. It's
it's
not for
racist.
me. It's just not for me. I'm sorry. I'm happy for
It
everyone who loved it.
it's fine. There you go. I get it. The yin and yang philosophy is one of those that's been neutered in Western ideals because we get what's just been brought this way, and very few people have actually studied it. And I'm not going to pretend like I'm some master of it either. But yeah, it goes against our core concepts here, and more Western ideas of light being good, dark being evil, and even that is something that's inherently false. And you look at scripture, like light being created is a good thing, but remember, God was also there in the darkness himself. It wasn't like God was resisting the darkness. It was some evil force out there. Like it existed, and it has its place in reality. Like there
Mhm.
needs to be time for the day, there needs to be time for the night, and God declares the whole of creation good. Well, what's part of the whole of creation? Well, darkness is part of the whole of creation. So, yeah, as much as it offends our eyes to not be able to see in darkness, that doesn't make it inherently bad. And that's kind of one of
Mhm.
the things we get here is like you've got to wrestle with who you are. Like Shang-Chi killed a guy, like, and despised himself for it. If I'm remembering the film correctly, it's been a while.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's part of who he is, regardless of what he does from now on. So, regardless of the people
Mhm.
he saves, regardless of eventually forever from now joining the Avengers because they're, taking too much time to make him show up again, he's still that person It's still a part of him. He doesn't have to be that person, but it's still a part of him that happened. Moses is a murderer by definition. Like, yeah, sure, he was defending someone else, but then he took it too far. He went the extra step, and that's something that went with him for the rest of his life.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think what's hard for us to remember, but I think it's important for us to remember because we're always kind of taught to be down on ourselves. Also, I kind of wanted to. I'm gonna backtrack here in a second, but going back to Kung Fu Panda. But first, I wanted to. God doesn't just call Paul. In fact, he didn't call Paul as he was before he had ever sinned. God called Paul slash Saul, which by the way, his name didn't change for those wondering. That's just a misconception of people who don't read their Bibles. Um, sorry, that's mean of me. Just trust me. The Bible actually says Saul, whose name was also Paul. He literally does not have a name change.
Yes.
The Bible's pretty clear about it. That's a sidestep. God calls Saul slash Paul while he's a murderer, while he's a sinner, while he's doing all those things. And he doesn't say pretend like that never happened. Like that's not what God calls us into. He calls us in with our mess. In fact, the reason Paul was able to be so successful is because of what he was taught, what he learned from his past, and because he was so terrible to see him as he is. That's what made his witness so powerful. God doesn't call you despite your stuff. He calls you including your past, all of you, your yin and your yang, so to speak. The thing I wanted to backtrack to with Kung Fu Panda, I just thought was interesting. I just had this thought. I think it's funny how in like this Eastern culture you have Confucianism and Taoism, and the idea of Taoism is just kind of go with the flow. Everything's going to work out. You are meant who you are meant to be. Everything else is what it's meant to be, and in the end, everything will be as it's meant to be. And it's kind of very much go with the flow, a lot more free flowing kind of idea. I think it's hilarious because when you think of Christianity, I think of like Calvinism and Arminianism, and everyone thinks of Arminianism as the go with the flow. But really, the Calvinists are the ones that saying that God has a plan and everything's going to work out according to God's plan.
Yeah.
I find that really funny, which is something from someone who is very much not a Calvinist. It was just a observation that I was like, weird. Anyway, this is what you get when you have an ADHD host. Now we're going to Avatar: The Last Airbender. Has a lot of yin yang stuff, has a lot of other teachings from all three of your major Eastern religions. But today we're going to be talking mostly about the Taoist aspects. I'm sure we'll just bring up Atla every single one of these episodes, even Christianity. Why? Because we just want to talk about Atla. That's all.
Yeah.
Christian, you want to break down, for me, the big moment where this stands out is the end of season 1, where we have the two fish that I called the yin yang fish. But even all the way towards the end, you see the moon making the water stronger and the sun kind of whatever makes the Fire Nation more powerful. You want to just kind of break down some of these yin yang Taoist elements in Avatar: The Last Airbender?
Well, one of the crucial parts of Taoism is that balance between yin and yang, and neither one is supposed to have power over the other. Neither one is supposed to be better than the other. Like, once again, that comes from we come from a more westernized idea of, if this is like this, the other thing cannot be as good as that thing. It has to be worse than that thing. But from this more Eastern perspective, it's no, like both of them work together in this balance that creates order in the universe while also mixing in the chaos that we experience in the universe. And for Avatar in specific, here in the first season, we have these two fish that represent the way that the world is supposed to work. And Admiral Zhao decides that he's gonna, take his own matters into things and kills the moon spirit that is represented in the physical form by these two fish with the obvious yin and yang pattern here. And what that does is it immediately sets the world out of balance, because that's not how the world of Avatar works. Now, does that work for our world? No. But I would say for what the story they've created, this is a thing that you can actually experience. So by destroying this one thing and seeking to control it, Zhao has created his own idea of what reality is supposed to be versus how this universe is organized. And it only takes the sacrifice of Yue to become the moon spirit herself, and that's rough, buddy, to end up bringing back this order from chaos that shouldn't have existed.
Mhm.
And then later on, too, you haven't watched Korra, right? Was it beyond the first season, I think?
What was the question?
have you gone past the first season of Korra?
No, but
Okay,
I'm
I'll
okay with you going past it.
yeah. So there is something else that happens in season 2 where we kind of, find I think it's season 2, where we find out that there are 2 other spirits in the spirit realm that are known as Rava and Vatu. And these are kind of the almost physical manifestations of the yin and yang of the Avatar universe, where Rava is, that more feminine, spirit of light, and wants to seek peace and order, and Batu is the more masculine, this spirit of chaos and full of darkness and stuff like that. And so they've
Mhm,
kind of been at war with each other for as long as the Avatar universe has been a thing. And what happens in there is that Rava back in the day is actually the one who gave the avatars their power, like uniting everything together.
mhm,
And because it took a more like Western sense of how these things work, Rava's the good guy. Wait, hold on, let me double check my names here. Yeah, Rava's the good guy. Vatu is the bad guy. So it's not as Taoist as it could be in that sense, but you get
mhm.
the bare bones of what is coming from there. It's like eventually Vatu has to be defeated because if he's brought into the world, chaos will reign, and mankind will be destroyed. Blah blah blah, stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. I just love how Atla does most things. Honestly, um, yeah, it's interesting because you got to think in Taoist, it's not chaos bad. It's chaos is good, order is also good, dark is good, light is also good. Everything is good when it's working as it should be, and not trying to overstep and take control. Which is where that ending of season one, where the bad guy is the one that's trying to control. I think it's so powerful in this aspect, and it's powerful storytelling too, because you kind of see Aang and the group all throughout season one, their free will love to just kind of exist and to just be. And it's not like Aang is an agent of chaos, but Aang's on a mission, but if he sees a penguin, he's gonna stop and play with that penguin. you know? Like,
He's still a kid.
yeah. And I think that's, and we talk about this on our Peter Pan episode, but it's a lot of what's important is to remember you need that. You need the silliness and the fun and all that. You also occasionally need the structure and the seriousness and to kind of have that balance. And that is something that I think I agree with very heavily. I think I love that. And I think the Bible pretty clearly outlines where, yeah, bad guys are the ones trying to take control. It is very much not a Christian idea that we should have, you know, our people rule the nation and make everybody else be like us and obey. That is not what the Bible says. It's very much the ones who try to control the people, where Ahab kind of controlled all of Israel and had them do his way, and he was also being evil, so it did not help. But you have that. You have where Nebuchadnezzar came and enslaved the people of Israel. Like the bad guys are the ones controlling, who are enslaving people, and the good guys are usually the ones setting everyone free. Galatians 5:1 is my favorite Bible verse. I do have a favorite, and it is for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, do not bond yourself again to a yoke of slavery, right? And it's like, yeah, that's, you don't go back to the law, you don't go back to sin, you live in freedom, which is separate from both of those. I think only found in Jesus. But I think I agree with the creators of Avatar will be freedom is that important thing, and letting go of control. For me, it's letting go of control because I believe there is a God who is more in control and better in control. For them, it is letting go of control because everything should be what it is meant to be. Yeah.
Yeah. And freedom comes with repercussions, because
Mhm.
freedom in Christ means being who you were actually always meant to be, to serve Him, to follow after Him. But freedom from the world is, well, I can be whatever I want to be. So, in a state where we are not a totalitarian regime enforcing everyone
Yeah.
must go to church on Sundays and then Sunday night and then Wednesday and a prayer meeting on Friday or what have you, like, which is how things shouldn't be. I don't believe in a theocracy. I
Mhm.
don't think that form of government would ever work. There's no such thing as a perfect form of government anyways.
True.
But at that same time, when we offer the freedom that we have in America, that means people are free to believe and do stupid things, to give in to
Oh,
their
yeah.
whims. Now, there are rules of law and stuff like that that prevent stuff like that, because we as a society have said no to these things without ever understanding the morality always behind those. But that freedom, if I want to be free in Christ, that means I have to extend that offer of freedom to everyone else, even knowing someone isn't going to say yes, even knowing someone isn't going to believe the same things I do, because that's love, is
Mhm.
allowing them to live and experience that freedom, even knowing most of the time they're not going to make that choice, the right
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. And a lot of what we're talking about here too, I feel like I've learned a lot better because I've been gardening the last few years, trying to create a pollinator garden on the side of my house. And it is interesting, especially when you grow from seed, because you don't always know what's coming up. That might be a weed, but also maybe that is one of the flowers that I want to grow here. So the interesting thing with gardening is you're not all structure, right? You're not, I'm going to plant this and only should come up, nothing else, no grass, nothing else. Because if you do that, you end up, especially if you're creating something like a pollinator garden, you create something that isn't actually healthy or supportive of the life that you're trying to support there. So you need it to be close to nature, but not completely wild, because completely wild could also, weeds or anything could take over your garden. You don't want that either. So I end up, when I'm trying to create a pollinator garden, having to have this balance of I need things to grow that's going to support the life. I need to take away things that aren't, but I have to allow nature to kind of take its own course to an extent. Turns out if you take out all the spiders, then other things happen that actually is bad for pollinators, even though spiders eat them. So you're like, what? That seems counterintuitive. Sometimes you just got to let a spider be a spider. And that's the whole principle of Tao. um, and that's where in Eastern culture, it's usually Taoist and Confucianism. Because Confucianism is going to tell me, yeah, pull the weeds. Don't let them overtake the garden. And Taoism is going to tell me, no, let the spider be a spider. And I need both of those things. Okay. Moving on to a lesser known IP, I guess. Maybe not a lot of
The
people have
one
heard
where
about it.
we're probably going to fight the most over this one. I'm looking forward to it.
Star Wars. Star Wars very much is this yin yang, finding the balance, Americanized version of balance. And it has a lot of, good versus evil, or, bringing balance to the force. The main reason I think of Star Wars, before I let Christian take over the conversation here, because I know he has a lot to say. He knows a lot more about the legends. He's going to tell you about Gray Jedi, all kinds of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, the reason that I think of this, Tao. So in Taoism, they believe in the Tao, which is the force or the way. It literally can be translated the force, which is this thing that is in all things that connects us all. So a lot of your spirituality in Taoism is they still believe they can commune with their ancestors because their ancestors have become part of the way or the force, if you want. So Star Wars just kind of yanked the force language completely out of the religion of Taoism. Say now it's a Jedi thing. And yeah, the force, completely a Taoist idea. And that's part of what we're going to talk about. The rest of what we're going to talk about will be brought to you by Christian Ashley. Christian, just go on a rant. Take it away.
I will. Thank you for allowing me this. So, I think where we're probably going to end up arguing, because I know we've argued about it in the past, is whether what balance means in the Star Wars universe. Balance, according to George Lucas, is all Jedi who are doing their jobs correctly and no Sith. Now, if this were and the idea being is that what Sith do is they corrupt life. They control life instead of working alongside it, which a good Jedi would be doing. Now, that's one of the reasons why we see in the prequels the Jedi not being those good Jedi. They've lost their way. And kind of honestly, they needed a purge. I'm not happy it happened, mind you. I don't like that a lot of people died. But to get things back on track, you had to have this chosen one come along who, for a time, ended up on the wrong side, ended up as a Sith, took the Jedi out of the picture except for Obi-Wan and Yoda and the other Jedi who made it out of, Order 66, which I'm okay with
Turns out a
because,
lot.
yeah, there's a lot of Jedi. There should be a fair amount who survived.
Yeah.
And so balance in a lot of people's false ideologies of Star Wars is two Jedi, two Sith, because, equals. But really, it's not because of the corruptive influence that, someone like Palpatine has over the Force. Like, I don't see Palpatine as a force for good in any way. He's a force for order in his own way. A very evil sense of order, but one that is self-serving, one that does not serve the good of all. It's what Jedi were supposed to do, was serve the good of all. Then we get into things like, and I am 100% a gray Jedi guy. And I know that kind of sounds different and something you wouldn't expect me to say compared to, like, my more conservative ideals, but it's that idea is like that the force itself is not a bad thing. It's also not inherently a good thing because, as we've seen, it could be used for good and evil. So, what's the issue if I use force lightning to jumpstart a speeder bike? You know, versus like using it to torture someone. Like, hey, there's a huge difference there. It's like there's an action I'm using, a moral action to cause harm to someone else. But I could just as easily heal someone to the point where they heal too much and their body just kind of goes in overdrive and dies because it's experiencing things they're not supposed to. But we think of healing as a good thing. Now, a lot of this comes from my favorite book in Star Wars and one of my favorite books of all time, and that's Traitor. And that's from the New Jedi Order series, where we have Jason Solo, Han and Leia's son, who is like being tortured by someone who he has learned is force sensitive that is working with this evil group of intergalactic aliens known as the Yuzan Vong named Verger. And it's her messing with him, trying to mold and shape him into like the perfect kind of amalgamation of light and dark, of allowing what we consider to be dark side powers to be used for good, to protect other people. And that's one of the things that a lot of fans were very upset at, and I think falsely so, is that, oh, that just makes the Jedi too much like Sith. And they're like, no, you're not paying attention to what's being said here. It's like, I mean, even like you think of a Jedi mind trick, that's supposed to be a good guy power that I can override someone's will and get them to do what I want. Does that sound very free? Does that sound very loving? Not really. But because the good guy did it, it makes it okay in people's eyes. Like, so I could rant a bit more about this. We have other things to discuss, and I have a place to get to later on. So I want to hear what you think.
I'm all for what Kylo Ren had to say in the greatest Star Wars movie. No, sorry, one of my favorite Star Wars movies, though, The Last Jedi. Just get rid of all the Jedi. Get rid of all the Sith. They're both wrong. I'm also a gray Jedi guy. I'm there with you on that. I I think what's interesting is, even though, I don't think George Lucas. I think this thing outlived him. Like, I think it's more than just what he originally intended it to be, and I think that's okay to let the story evolve past him. It's okay,
Yeah.
guys. It's fine. But I think there's still a point when you get to some of the other stuff I want to talk about. But I want to look at first Anakin Skywalker, because you mentioned the using the good even for evil. Anakin just wanted Padme to live, and that's what turned her to do the dark side, right? And of course, I have a fundamental dislike for the categories of dark side and the Force, kind of like the way they do it, because if you're going to use the Force, then we're getting into Taoism, which to me means that there is no dark and not dark side. Everything is good, which is why I like the Gray Jedi. We can use all of these things for good. And it's where I really like the Dawn of the Jedi, the book. And this is where, if Jedi, what they were meant to be, is what the Jedi are in the Dawn of the Jedi, then I'm all for it. Let's only have them. That's great. Because here, they're learning to use their anger for good. They're learning to use all of their emotions, to not deny part of themselves, to use their relationships for good, to use their solidarity for good. They're learning to use all things to just be true to who they are, and to use that to better the universe. And I think that is kind of the true Taoist principle, is what we see of the Jedi in the Dawn of the Jedi. And I think that's the Gray Jedi is the closest to that later on in the Star Wars universe, if we're getting past prehistoric Star Wars.
Well, that's a great point too, is that along the way, the Jedi lost their way and they became legalists, really. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, in the past, we've encountered people who give in too much to their emotions. They become Sith, they were dark Jedi, and they cause a lot of harm to people. Well, how do we stop that? Well, stop feeling. If you don't feel,
Yeah.
then you won't be tempted by that. It's like you learned the wrong lesson here. It's like, what was it about that person versus you who experienced the same things and didn't make that choice? How can we foster that when we see it again in someone else, and then redirect that energy somewhere else?
Yeah. And that's not to say there wasn't wisdom there. So here, I'm sorry I keep bringing up The Last Jedi. Another thing I like in The Last Jedi that correlates to my own experiences with my own spirituality. There's a scene of Yoda destroying the temple, knowing the books are in there, and Luke is distraught because those are the books of it's their sacred text, and Yoda goes, "Hey, the Force is more than that. It's about more than the temple. It's about more than religious books." And that's something I had to experience in my own life of my Christianity, my belief with Jesus, my spiritual connection with the divine is more than the Bible. The way I was treating the Bible was almost like an idol, in my opinion. Whereas like, this is the end all. If I know this well enough, then I'm good. And I had to get to a point of, actually, it's about relationship with the divine, and this is a good tool to help me. But at the end of the day, it's a tool. That's all it is. And some people are going to disagree with me on that. That's fine. But I had to learn that personally. And the danger is I could have completely left it and say, I don't need this text at all. Well, that would have been wrong too. Because it's an important tool to help me with my relationship with the divine. And that's where I had to learn, which were actually like in the movie where it shows, hey, this isn't the end all, but it also shows she kept the books. The books are still important. Now, how they followed up with that later on, I think was terrible. But I like that they left it there because they're still important. So that's something I really like that I think kind of connects to this whole Taoist principle in my own spiritual journey. Do you want to slaughter me for saying The Last Jedi more than once on a podcast?
No, I'm used to you. But no, actually, in that scene, other than the fact that Yoda uses way too much force abilities to beyond the grave to affect the physical world, I'm not too big on that.
That was just
As
fan
far as
service.
like
It's fine.
what as far as what is intended there, I actually kind of get behind that message. It's like I even like the line, page turners they were not. Because sometimes, guess what? Reading scripture, I'm not always happy.
Man.
Sometimes I get bored. It's not God's fault. It's just me sometimes reading up on this stuff. It can hurt my brain to think about it, or like I just don't get it when I'm reading it.
Mhm.
So to look upon it like that, but still say these are still important. I just made you think they were gone. So could you imagine a life if there was no Bible? If we did not have the word of God, would God's word still be spread? Yes. In the moment, I'm going to panic. It's like the Bible's gone forever. Like, surely we got to get to the people who've memorized it so we can write it down as soon as possible.
Mhm.
And as important as the Bible is, the most important book in the history of the entire world,
Mhm.
God would still be able to move without it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. And I think it's an important lesson. Man, we could honestly do a whole episode of Taoism and Star Wars, but I think I'm good to
Get
move
to the main
to
event.
yeah. The best fandom there is, Kingdom Hearts. Specifically, I'm just going to be looking at Riku. We could go through all of Kingdom Hearts because it talks a lot about light and dark and the light. At the end of the first Kingdom Hearts game, they open up the Kingdom of Hearts. They're expecting it to be pure darkness. And what do you see in the middle of the darkness is a light, and that light is the king. Man, you're talking about Christian and Taoism all together at once? Right there, that moment. But more importantly, I think is the story of Riku.
Yes.
This is one of those to me. If it were a redemption arc, it would be the best redemption arc. It would beat out Avatar: The Last Airbender guy. I can't remember his name right now. So Zuko? Is that what I'm thinking of?
Zuko.
Yeah, it would beat out Zuko. But it's not really a redemption arc. It is a whole other thing. Riku's story is one of the most fascinating stories to me ever. Because you have it set up for that typical redemption arc. You have where, in the beginning of this game series, darkness enters the world that Sora, Riku, and Kairi live on. And I'm sorry, guys. Riku says, I'm not afraid, and he opens his heart to the darkness, and it consumes him. It takes him over. He actually is straight up one of the bad guys of the first game. And what you expect to happen is, oh, he's going to see the light, he's going to meet the King Mickey, and it's going to change his heart, and he's never going to use darkness again. That's not what happens at all. Christian, could you take it away? Like, break down some of the story elements of what happens to Riku in Kingdom Hearts.
Well, of course, Joshua, darkness is the heart's true essence. But Kingdom Hearts is light.
This is so much fun.
For Riku specifically, I love the direction they take him because it'd be super easy for a primarily children's-based video game to just say light good, dark evil. And that's kind of what the bare bones of the first game is, but there's still hints
Mhm,
there that there's a little more. And as Riku's journey continues, Chain of Memories, Kingdom Hearts 2, so on and so forth, Dream Drop Distance really is like we see how he has learned this is how I abused the darkness before.
mhm.
And the whole thing of, Ansem, Xehanort, young Xehanort, blah, 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 so many other people, time
Yeah.
travel, it's fun, are all studying darkness because they're fascinated by it. Because, as we learned through the series, like all the worlds used to be one world. Then, they had this huge big war between the forces light and darkness, and boom, worlds were separated. And darkness kind of separates worlds from each other,
Mhm,
while also at the same time consuming them for the heartless. And you have Riku here, who is struggling against who he was and doesn't ever want to be that person again. He doesn't want to be the person who fights his friends, like
mhm.
thinking that he was on the side of good, but that darkness is still in him. So what does he do with it? He weaponizes it for good. He is able, the only person,
Correct.
like the point where I think it's the Ansem version of Xehanort at this point in time, who's like, "You're like an anomaly, dude. Like, how are you able to do this? I've been researching darkness my whole life," and like he's not going to say it, but Xehanort fell to darkness a very long time ago.
Mhm.
But Riku didn't, and it's because of the strength of his heart. It's because of the bonds he made with his friends. Xehanort has never had a friend a day in his life outside of Ericus. But Ericus,
Yeah,
that whole thing with them, there was a divide, and they just weren't
right.
as good as friends as Sora, Riku, and Kairi were.
Yeah.
And Riku is able to draw on that strength in the same way Sora is able to use it for light. Riku is able to do it with darkness because
Mm,
darkness, while a very negative figure in the series, can still be utilized, much like
mhm.
some would say dark side energies in Star Wars, for
Yeah,
good if you're able to work with it, if you're able to contain yourself.
yeah. And that's where Kingdom Hearts is very much Japanese and American culture meshed together in a way that doesn't make sense most of the time. Because I do think the darkness label almost is unhelpful because usually light and dark seem to just be good and bad in the game, but not always. You have seen the Xehanort use powers of light for evil. You've seen him use Kingdom Hearts itself, which is light, for evil. Which I think Kingdom Hearts, in my mind, is very much like the Tao, but whatever. Leave that alone for now because that's too deep of a thing to get on. Because it's an essence. It's something in all of us. It's also a place out there that exists, and all those things. Which the Tao is also. So sure. Um. Anyway, I love that Riku. I think as long as he fought himself, he lost, and that's what you see in Chain of Memories. Chain of Memories has absolutely no consequences for Sora and all of the consequences for Riku, which is infuriating because you think you finish the game. It's like, oh, do you want to play through again as Riku? And I just thought it was the same game, but using a different character. Nope. It's the part of the game that story actually matters. I digress. But going through and him learning to accept himself for himself and then to use who he is, even if he doesn't like who he is, he's very much a tortured soul for good. And what's great about it too, I love this in Kingdom Hearts, because even if you had something similar to this in any other IP, you might have a point where he starts to turn to good, and the main protagonist Sora is going to kind of come along and teach him how to be better, because Sora's going to be light years better than he is once he turns to the good side. Nope, not at all. Riku is better. Riku becomes a master of the Keyblade, and Sora's still kind of behind. And you're like, wait a minute, what? I love how they do that. The storytelling of Riku in the Kingdom Hearts series is just phenomenal. Um, and to see him kind of accept who he is, and not only that, there's some words of affirmation from the king, which I don't know if it's intentional, but the king very much to me, and this is just my experience. Maybe it's just because I'm Christian, so I always think when I hear king, I go, Jesus or God, maybe. Especially when the king is holding the key of light in the middle of Kingdom Hearts. Anyway, um, but this is something that King Mickey says to Riku that I get chills about. It blew my mind. He says, "Until now," and this is the king talking, "I thought darkness was nothing but bad, but my time with you made me change my mind. You've chosen a road I never thought of. Light and dark, back to back. With you, the Mingano way, no one's ever seen before. I want to see where that road leads. And if it's okay, I want to walk the road with you. Man, Mickey knows he can't walk it for him. He knows he can't carry him through it. He knows it's something that he'll never go through himself. And he says, I just kind of want to walk that road with you and see where this goes. By your side. Man, that's just such a powerful moment to me. I'm like, what? Like, it's sorry. Take it away. I'm just going to start rambling, I think.
But with preconceived notions, you would think Mickey would never be the person to say that. But because he witnesses it with his own eyes, he sees how it's done through Riku, he changes his mind. Because once you expect, from someone who came from the more Yin Sid / Erica side of things, light good, dark bad. I mean, if you want to distill it down to its basis points. To the point where that caused a lot of problems along the way because Terra wasn't ready for it. Aqua wasn't as ready for it as it should have been. And Ventus definitely wasn't ready for it. But Mickey was able to overcome. He was the only one who got to really make it out alive for the most part out of those four. And so he saw that, and you could easily just make him like the guys against darkness again because it took away his friends. It took away the people he cared about. But because he sees it happening in someone that he has started to mentor and care for, is really kind of a father figure in some respects, which is weird enough for Disney and Final Fantasy as characters to be doing that. But you know what? It works. It works. That's where he changes his mind. And it's because the proof is right before him. And Mickey is the kind of person who will change his mind when new information is presented.
Yeah. I'm not a process theology kind of guy, but I could see this being strong process theology. Of you see, God, the king, is actually interacting and reacting to what's happening in real time. I'm not a process guy. I'm not there for that. I do love the image of light of the king saying, you know what, your path is different, but I'm going to walk it with you because I want to see where it goes. I love that. I love that image. I love King Mickey. I love Riku. I love all the characters in this game. And I think it's a powerful thing for us to take. Sometimes you might see a new young Christian or someone at your church that you're like, well, I've never seen a Christian dress like that or act like that, or who likes these kind of things or part of this fandom or whatever. I think it's important that we come alongside those people and say, I'm going to walk this path with you. I don't know what it looks like, and I want to be there with you. I think that's an important thing for us all to learn to be more like King Mickey in our discipleship. I wanted to throw out a book that Will has recommended on the show before when we're talking about light and dark. It's God's Holy Darkness, and mostly it's dealing with race stuff because a lot of times we use darkness and stuff, or the church has previously used that to support racism more or less. And this book kind of attacks a lot of that, but it also just shows where God is in the darkness. And there are a lot of verses where God's dwelling in the night. He's there at the dark. His tent is in the nighttime. All these things. In the beginning, God was in the darkness, and then he spoke light. And not because he needed light because dark sucked, because he needed both. God created the sun and the moon. The sun to rule by day, the moon to rule by night, right? 1 Kings 8:12. I don't do a lot of Bible verse reading in this show, so y'all should be able to forgive me. But it even says, the Lord has said that he would dwell in thick darkness. That's Solomon speaking, and he's just saying what God has spoken to him as a prophecy, that God says he's going to dwell in the darkness. So I think it's important that we don't just draw these hard lines all the time. Sometimes lines can be drawn. Some things call sin, right? But sometimes realize some things might just look a little different than you think. Just because someone likes something that you think no Christian should be able to like, or votes a way that you think no Christian should vote, maybe wait. Maybe understand that God is in all these places and kind of see where things go, perhaps. One thing that we know God is in, though, is Winnie the Pooh. So I want to talk about my favorite Taoist books. That's not what I want. There we go. My favorite Taoist books is The Tao of Pooh and The Tale of Piglet by Benjamin Hoff. Okay, sorry. I just saw a private message from Christian. So really quick, we're just going to roll through some of this, but it's the author was trying to explain Taoism using Winnie the Pooh, which sounds ridiculous. It really does. Until you read literally any of it and you're like, wait a minute. He starts bringing up some of these quotes from Winnie the Pooh, and you're like, hold up now. It wasn't not meant to be a Taoist book by any means. But
yes,
doing nothing often leads to the very best of something. Yeah, that's a Taoist principle. What day is it? Asked Pooh. It's today, said Squeaked Piglet. My favorite day. Those are just straight up like Taoist parables, basically. And a lot of the ideas of Taoism is just simply simple. It's just simplicity. It's learning to be simple, to allow things to be, to sometimes do nothing. And one of the quotes from the book I wanted to bring up, that this is not from Winnie the Pooh. This is him using the Winnie the Pooh characters to kind of explain some Taoist thought that I think really drives home part of what I love about the tradition and history behind Taoism. Rabbit's clever, said Pooh thoughtfully. Yes, said Piglet. Rabbit's clever. And he has brain. Yes, said Piglet. Rabbit has brain. There was a long silence. I suppose, said Pooh. That's why he never understands anything. I love it. It's ridiculous. And it's probably true of people like me and Christian. Sometimes we don't understand things because we're just thinking too hard. And sometimes life's a little more simple than we believe it to be.
That's one huge thing I had to learn. I, by nature, don't comprehend other people's emotions well. I had to learn to be more empathetic. I had to learn to think, well, just because I think through this situation logically, this is the answer we should be getting towards. Why isn't anyone else on the same track as me? Well, that's because their brains don't work the same way mine does. So I have to be appreciative of them. I have to look beyond my own perspective and think, okay, knowing Joshua as I do, he's going to say this, so I should support him this way versus, hey, you're doing it wrong. Why don't you believe The Last Jedi is worthless and has no entertainment value whatsoever? Like God must hate you. Like, no, like I need to see from his point of view where he's coming from while I disagree 100% completely and yet still love my friend, learn how he appreciates things, how he can see whiny Luke in his opinion as a terrible person. It's me seeing the growth that Luke's go through the 3 movies and yet at the same time seeing a regression in Last Jedi and that being a positive for you when it's a very huge negative for me. It's like both of those things, now, as far as looking at things objectively, neither one is true. This isn't like some concept of like, the Trinity or, Jesus dying on the cross. Those are objective truths. These are subjective truths.
Yeah.
Using fandom as a way to say that is a little silly, but like when it comes to other people's emotions, like just because I wouldn't get upset at something doesn't mean someone else will or won't. Like I like making fun of people because that's how I show you I love you.
Yeah. Well,
Other
let
people
me take what you're saying even further. And this is actually going to even get to some of why I don't always agree with some Taoist stuff. Some people were born with a dispensation for alcoholism. Should I let them be their true selves, which is going to be an alcoholic? I would say no. I'm sure there's a better Taoist response to that. I'm not a Taoist apologist, so I couldn't tell you what it is. But that's where I see a lot of problems with this, is a lot of people are born with predispositions towards stuff that's terrible, that we should absolutely do something about. And for me, just because for me, alcohol is not a problem at all. How could you be an alcoholic? I could drink and it not faze me, and I'm not going to need a drink the next day. Well, that's not true for everybody. And that's something I have to understand and be able to relate to people who it is a huge problem for them. And, the Bible says to not be a stumbling block to your brother. Part of that to me means not drinking alcohol in front of people who maybe couldn't handle it the same way I do. Same thing with like anger. It's not just addictions, right? Some people are just more angry, have anger issues. I might not have anger issues at all. For me, I have to sometimes pretend to be angry because I know I should be angry at this. And if I don't react right, people won't respond right. So I need to put on my mean face. But other people, any little thing could tick them off. And understanding those sensitivities and being able to relate to people, that's kind of what all of this is about. There are stuff I don't agree with Taoism, but there is this essence of learning who people are, letting them be them, and relating to them as they are and not as I wish they would be. Not as I wish Christian was a Last Jedi fan, but relating to him as someone who does not like The Last Jedi. Oh man. So
May can't come soon enough for that episode.
I wanna end this with, were all things really made good? Because that's the thing in Taoism, right? Vinegar tastes like vinegar, and that is good. It should taste like vinegar. I am who I am meant to be, so I just need to nurture me to be the best me. That kind of thing. were all things really made good, Christian?
Originally, yes, things were created good, and I still believe things are good. However, the world has been corrupted by the fall of man.
Mhm,
And as such, that corruption brings evil, it brings sin into the world. That doesn't make those things less valuable, doesn't make them not good, but it doesn't make them as good as they were supposed to be.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, and I agree with that. And some of the we're going to disagree on part of some of the stuff I'm going to bring up, but some of the Taoist things too isn't just everything is good as it is, but as its Tay is. So as its inner essence is what it could be is good, more or less. Um, so so one example I thought of, which is going to be a controversial one that we're going to have to go through really quickly, transgenderism. Right, the Taoist principle I think would be if you truly believe you are different gender than your biological sex, then being true to yourself might include doing that surgery, and that is you being the most you are and nurturing you to be who you are. I don't personally have any problem with that. Like, I don't see the Bible attacking that. I know Christian believes differently than me on this, but that is like where I see this Taoist principle. It's not always just because you were born this way that is good. It's more of your Tay is good and kind of nurturing that. Do you want to respond to that really quick before
Yeah, yeah. I
we
mean,
lose it?
I would go to I think it's Jeremiah 17:9, where the heart is deceitful above all things. And just because the heart desires something doesn't make it good.
Yeah.
And that would be an example of that.
Yeah. I disagree with you, but I do agree with the
Yes.
the idea that yeah, the heart is deceitful. So not everything my heart wants is a good thing. Sometimes I have to learn to beat myself into submission. You know, the kind of Christianese term a little bit is just kind of learning to, hey, sometimes I want things I shouldn't want, and I need to be better. And that's where my Christian ideology conflicts with some Taoist principles of, man, I shouldn't want to just constantly eat. That's bad for my health. It's bad for all these other things, and that is part of me. Maybe they wouldn't say it's part of my Tay, but for me, that's where I see more Confucianist ideas or Christian ideas being more helpful of learning to submit and to try and put some structure in my life that's going to help in a different way. Um, and at the same time, I still need to learn to accept me as I am, not try to be something I'm not. In work, I'm a manager, and learning to manage well is more important than me trying to do every single position because, man, I could do it better than them. Learning to be what I was meant to be in that situation. And that's where I see the Taoist principle shining in really a positive light, but there are ways that I disagree with it. All right. Do you have any other comments or anything before we wrap this one up?
For the sake of time, I'm good.
All right. Well, so for the sake of time, otherwise I wouldn't be good. But all right, then let's go ahead and wrap this one up. We'll start with recommendations. I already gave mine, but the Tao of Pooh. You don't have to read both books, but please read the Tao of Pooh. I think it's really good to help you understand the other religion, and it's a good way of centering yourself, learning to be more simple and kind of accept things. Even if you're not Taoist, I think there's a lot of good lessons that you can learn. So that, and of course, I'm going to remind everybody of what was it? Was it God in the Darkness? What was the book that Will recommend I brought up earlier?
Uh, Let me look at the slides.
That's what I was about to do. God's Holy Darkness.
There you go.
Yeah. So make sure you check that out. Did you have any recommendations for everybody, Christian?
Um, I mentioned earlier, Outlaw Star is really fun. It's an older '90s anime. There's some things in there. If you want to keep a pure mind, now I suggest you might want to stay away from the hot springs episode. But other than that, like it's a lot of good fun. Like I really enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah. Sweet. So with that, again, this episode was brought to you by our patrons. Thank you guys for please smash that like button. Subscribe. Um, and just to remember, we're all the chosen people, a geekdom of priests.